Welcome to the Extreme Underground, the show where I take a look at some of the most disturbing and controversial films in the world of cinema. Today we'll be talking about Unearthed Films, Dis. Directed by Adrian Corona, starring Bill Oberst Jr., Laurie Jo Hendricks, and Peter Gonzalez Falcon. This movie's about an ex-soldier with a criminal past that takes refuge in the woods. A demonic figure seeks out the seed and blood of killers to feed plants in the woods. I actually don't have any idea what's going on in this movie, but we'll talk about that. There will be spoilers, of course, but in this kind of movie, there's nothing really to spoil because it's very cerebral. It's more about taking in the art as it is and coming up with your own conclusions as to what exactly is going on. This is definitely a step in a different direction for Unearthed, who's usually known for like over-the-top gore and just crazy extreme cinema. And while there are extreme scenes in this, including the beginning, most of it is very trippy and is gonna make you just kind of question what's happening. That's not to say that there isn't creepy stuff. For example, the movie does kick off with a girl who's been chained up. She's been rotting in this cellar, eating nothing but rats. Like, she's actually physically rotting to the point where there's maggots in her head. She's being held captive by an unknown figure who kind of looks like he's wearing a mask right out of Brightburn. We'll call this man the Harvester because that's basically what he's doing. He's harvesting cum from both men and women as well as blood to feed his garden. And so this intro scene is pretty gruesome because we get our first introduction to this character. After this, we're introduced to our main lead, played by Bill Oberst Jr. He lives in a secluded cabin in the woods. He's a wanderer. He looks around for things that he can take back to his own home. He goes to abandoned houses and buildings, and he does find some weird things. He sees some pentagrams and some herbs. So this is either the setting for people to ward off the evil in the woods, or to summon something. This aspect is left very open. On his journey, Ariel sees a woman in a red robe. She's seductive and lures him into the rubble. He follows her to the edge of the building as she jumps off and potentially commits suicide. Ariel at this point has had it. He doesn't know what to do with his life anymore. He's frustrated, and as he's about to kill himself, he's knocked out by the masked man. This is where we cut to flashbacks and we kind of see a little bit more of the story, and this is where we get our first little bit of dialogue, because up until this point, about half of the movie, there's no dialogue whatsoever. The flashbacks show Bill meeting up with a friend in a strip club where they put lotion on their face, known as the cum of the forest. Whatever it is, it seems important. And this is the kind of thing where you're not going to quite understand what this is all about. Now Ariel finds himself in the same position as the woman that we saw from the beginning. He's chained up and he's tortured and used for both his blood, which is extracted via syringe, which is fed to the roots or whatever this person is growing. Bill eventually breaks free, but he encounters this burnt man who's super grotesque, and he ends up biting his dick off. It gets a little bit crazy, and then we flash forward to pigs eating his body. Now, getting into the specifics of what I actually liked, Bill Oberst Jr. does a fantastic job. I've always liked his work. He's an indie actor that deserves more than being in the indie scene, to be honest. Like, I've praised him in everything that we've seen him in for good reason. He's got a really unique look that really fits Ariel as a character because he's a weathered looking guy. You can tell that he's been through a lot of stuff. He's seen a lot of stuff. You can tell that Bill really embraced this character, and on the Blu-ray you can see a behind the scenes and an interview where he goes on to describe how much he enjoyed making this movie, which is about regrets and fears and nightmares, and trying to figure out if this is all in Ariel's mind or what aspects exist in the real world. As an audience member, it's very hard to distinguish what is what, so I can understand if people don't completely like this movie. A big standout in this film is just how everything looks. The cinematography is fantastic, and you couple that with the location, which is absolutely beautiful. And they went through a lot of effort to actually capture all of this. It was a 4.5 hour hike to the top of this mountain. They had to literally walk with all their gear to the top of this mountain in order to shoot it. And it pays off because if you look at this movie, like it's undeniable how nice it looks. The shot types are great as well. My favorite shot being where Bill is about to kill himself and you have the masked man come up from behind him with the axe. It just looks really cool. Everything just has a lot of character. They use a lot of wide shots to show the isolation isolation and show that Ariel is by himself a lot of the time. In the basements, it's grungy, it's wet, it's dirty, and definitely a place that you wouldn't want to be, especially if you're chained up and being harvested slowly for who knows how long. The woman in the movie is not only beautiful, but also a way to add a little bit more character to Ariel as well, as we see flashbacks of him and his wife, and this woman basically represents her to some degree, and this is where we can kind of come up with our own conclusions as to what happened. It looked like in the flashback she was dying from a sickness, and now maybe Ariel, present day, when he sees this woman in the robe, he sees his wife, and when she jumps off and kills herself, this is basically a visual reminder of his own loss, and maybe it was that point that really set him off and made him feel lonely for the rest of his life, which would make sense when it comes to the next scene where he's very emotional and about to kill himself. There's a lot of different ways that you can think about this, and I know this is a lot different from like the other Extreme reviews for the Extreme Underground, but it's an Unearthed Films movie, and I think there's a lot of crossover of fans of Extreme cinema and of course other things that Unearthed has been putting out. Now when it comes to my dislikes, I would definitely say maybe the obscurity of things wasn't necessarily for me. While I can appreciate the artistic value and I understand certain elements, or at least I can put things together for my own interpretation, and I know that it's up to everybody's interpretation, I wish there was a little bit more guidance as to what it was initially about. Obviously, seeking for answers and having everything spelled out isn't necessarily what art is about in general. However, only having watched this once, I think like I would need a few more times to kind of really formulate some thorough ideas as to what all of this could mean, for me at least. So for that reason, I think a lot of people might be thrown off because you need to think about it and it's not going to make sense for everybody because everybody is intended to have their own interpretation of all of the characters and all of the situations that play out in this film. Some of the more noticeable issues that I didn't like were the voiceovers. The ADR, when we finally do have talking, is very poorly done.
Welcome to the underworld.
Or at least poorly mixed. I'm not 100% exactly what it was. It seemed like the audio levels were way too high. It's very fake and forced, and if I found out this wasn't ADR, I'd be absolutely shocked, because there is a scene where I thought it was ADR, where Ariel screams into the void basically, but I did see it in the behind the scenes and it was Bill screaming, so even though it sounded like it was ADR, it wasn't. So I'm not 100% exactly what happened here with the audio, but it was definitely a big turnoff for me. This is also a shorter movie at just about an hour, and I think I kind of wanted a little bit more. What exactly that would entail, I don't really know. Maybe even a prolonged sequence of Ariel when he's being tortured, to kind of drag it out in a similar fashion to Martyrs, where the torture in that film was intensified by the length of the scenes and the repetition. And I think we could have been a little bit more on board with Ariel as a character if we saw more of his struggles before he actually eventually breaks free. I also want to know what the roots are, because you can see these things being fed and sometimes they like pulsate. Like, are they creatures? What's happening? How did that guy get the lotion? How long has this been going on? Because that's a flashback, it's black and white. I wish there was just a little bit more explanation as to what was going on. And I completely understand that this isn't the kind of movie that was intended to have explanation, but there are a lot of things that I wanted to know more about. At the end of the day, I did enjoy the movie. It does have some wonderful aspects, the cinematography, the location, the acting and the emotion from Bill Oberst. The creepy harvester was a really cool look, and the intro was really great. Although I do wish we had more of an explanation and we saw more of what the harvester was really doing and what these plants were all about. But at the same time, I understand the artistic nature of this movie in general. It seems very experimental, so if you're into that kind of thing, you might enjoy it. Unfortunately, the audio was kind of weird and I didn't love the flashbacks. I appreciated some of the storytelling, but I didn't like the man in the strip club. I thought he was kind of awkward and their whole interaction just seemed really unnatural. But when all is said and done, I'm gonna give this 3 blow-up dolls out of 5. As always, thank you for watching. Like this video and comment below with your thoughts on the film if you've seen it. If you haven't and you do want to check it out, links are in the description. And if this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with everything Bloodbath and beyond.